When I first had the opportunity for formal training, it was in Washington, D.C., at the Armstrong High School, where I pursued as a major art and architecture. I remember very distinctly having worked first of all in wax and then in tempera and even a little oil paint. Later on, I moved over into the courses in architecture and had some experience of rendering Greek and Roman facades in the conventional way of that time.
Prior to getting to Virginia State, I was in high school at Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. Because of racial prejudice in Washington, D.C., this was an all-black school. We had 5 instructors with doctorates on that faculty. Wow. And so we got like a prep school education. This was a public school, but we got all the cultural things that one would expect in a private school. And Henry Grant was the band director there, and he was just a wonderful band director. I mean, he had Frank West, the tenor player, was we were in the same band. Being in that context, I was lucky because not only did Frank and I have Henry Grant as a music teacher, we had James Reese Europe's sister, Mary Reese Europe, also on that faculty. And any number of people that have achieved all kinds of things that went to Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. It was a marvelous school, so we're very lucky.
I went to Lucretia Mott Elementary School and Dunbar High School, which is a very famous high school. That high school started in my mother's church in the basement, 15th Street Presbyterian Church. And Dr. Grimke's brother was the minister there. And they started a high school for young people who wanted to go to college, and there wasn't one. And later on, they moved into a small building, and later on, that building that was Dunbar High School, where I went. I like to draw and paint, and my mother used to bring me materials. She was very supportive. And I would draw paper dolls when I was, I don't know, about 8 or 9 years old. I would draw paper dolls with huge wardrobes. And then I thought some friends would ask me sometimes, you know, make me one. And so then I got the idea that we didn't have any money at all. I got the idea that it would be nice to charge them 5 cents, you know, a nickel for a doll and an outfit. And later on, when I went to high school, I used to do some drawings, projects for the teachers at Minor Teachers College. And I had a very nice experience in high school in art. That's when I decided I wanted to be an artist. That's what gave me some direction in art, and that's all I can base it on, is when I decided that I was going to work with the problems of black women, when I was going to try to make people see them as beautiful, dignified, strong people, instead of, as Ralph Ellison says, invisible. Another aim I have is to take art to our people who do not go to museums, and to do this we have to get art by our people into museums.
I'm Dr. Pamela Harris Lawton, and I'm a 5th-generation teacher, born and raised in Washington, D.C. Education was a way to move forward and to move up. And because D.C. was an area where you had one of the first HBCUs, a very extensive one with a medical school and a dental school and all these things, and then you eventually had Minor Teachers College, it was a place where you could be right at home and yet go to school and get an education. From my great-great-grandmother to my great-grandmother, then to my grandmother Edith, and then to her children, my mom, Patricia, and her sister Louise, all went to Minor Teachers College. I became interested in Thomas Hunster, or introduced to him, because as I say, my grandmother Edith had this profile painting portrait, oil painting of her mother, my great-grandmother Jenny, and her high school art teacher painted it. That's what she told me. And I said, well, who was that? And she just said his name was Thomas Hunster. And I have that memory, you know, I've had that memory, I've kept it with me for years. And I hadn't thought about it much, right? I just remember that painting. I just thought he was a high school art teacher, and I never thought more about it. He wasn't just the art teacher at the M Street School and Dunbar High School, but he was also the art supervisor for all of the colored schools. So that meant he was in charge of what happened with visual arts for K-12 schools on the colored side of the public school system. And so he was always looking for things that would be cutting edge and innovative. So how could one man make such a big impact on art education alone? And so what he did was he found those best of those students and trained them to help train other students. And so then it gets to this point where he's then training elementary school teachers in drawing, you know, basic drawing, so that they could then teach the students. And then he got to a point where he said, well, just like Walter Smith, we need to have people who teach specifically art. You know, don't want to put it all on the classroom teacher at the elementary side. And so I think he was instrumental in starting the art education program at what was Minor Teachers College at the time. That whole art education program happened because of him. And I think that that's one thing that's a real testament to his legacy. And I was pondering on why somebody who basically started art education in Washington, D.C. for Black children, how they could be forgotten. And I think part of it is, it's part of what I'm studying myself now. So I think there's this kind of horrible thing in a way that when a person devotes themselves to teaching, more so than, say, their art practice, that people will say, oh, you know, I've had this great teacher, but they don't necessarily talk about them a lot. Like, I don't know how much Alma Thomas talked about Thomas Hunster. I don't know. But I think that that's part of it, that, you know, there are great artists who all have had a teacher, but how often do you hear them talk about who their teacher was? When I think about my own education and studying the history, for example, of art education as a profession, there's no mention in a lot of the books that we use in teaching our students the history of art education about Black art educators. I really feel like as art educators, we need to keep those folks alive, and that's really important.